Hey everyone, welcome to Data Engineers Launch number 66. We'll go ahead and get started in a couple minutes. We'll go time to join us.
Searching for a better way to collaborate with your team? Try Miro.
Got some ads on the music, so I'll mute it for a couple seconds so you can skip through that. All right, we are back on. Everyone, welcome to Data Engineers Lunch. We'll give everyone another minute or so. Alrighty, let's go ahead and music. Hey everyone, welcome to Data Engineers Launch number 66. Today's talk is going to be on Airflow and Presto. I'll be the speaker for today. I'm an engineer here at Anant. Co-organizers for the event are Rahul and myself. We are looking for guest speakers for Data Engineers Lunch, as well as our sister lunch, Cassandra.Link. So if you are interested in giving a talk, feel free to reach out to me. My email is listed below, but also if you're interested in sponsoring Data Engineers Lunch or Cassandra.Link, you can reach out to me as well. And don't forget to spread the word. All these videos are on YouTube. It's easily shareable. So if you find a good topic or you want to share something that you learned with someone, feel free to hit the share button and drop the link to them. Here at Data Community DC, we believe in building an inclusive environment. So no matter your race, gender, sexual orientation, everyone is welcome, and we expect the respect to be given to all. Data Community DC is built up of a bunch of different organizations. Our talk here, Data Engineers Lunch, falls under Data Wranglers DC. So if you're in all the various talks related to Data Community DC. You can find out more at datacommunitydc.org. So what do we cover here at Data Engineers Launch? We cover everything from the ingress to egress of data, data cleaning, ETL, data wrangling in general, as well as all the different tools and technologies in the ecosystem that play a role in these data engineering topics. So today's talk is going to be on Airflow and Presto. One's a data orchestration tool. One is a SQL or distributed SQL analytics engine. So we've done a couple talks on Spark as well. So if you're interested in all the various other talks on Data Engineers Launch, you can find them on our you can find them on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/AnantCorp, and we have a whole playlist with all the data engineers lunches on there already. And again, if you're interested, if you are a data engineer or if you're a sprouting data engineer and you want to learn something and then give a talk about it, feel free to reach out to me. If anyone's new, say hi, hello, what do you do with data engineering? As well as group roles. If you have a question, ask it. This is meant to be community. So if you have any questions, feel free to speak up or drop a comment in the Zoom chat or YouTube chat. We have people monitor both, as well as please be polite and courteous to others. The guest speaker will have their preferences when they take over, and we'll cover those once we get there. Here at Anant, we design, build, and manage global real-time data analytics platforms surrounding Cassandra, Spark, and Kafka. So data engineering is a way of life for us. DataStax is a partner and a sponsor. GW University helps provide venue space when we have in-person events. We also have some institutional and organizational sponsors. If anyone has any jobs that they're offering, or if they're looking for a job, feel free to drop links and we'll get them transferred to and from, as well as if there's any meetups, hackathons, or conferences that you would like to promote, feel free to drop those as well. Anant is hiring for full-time or part-time positions, data platform operators, engineers, or architects. You can find out more at careers.anant.us. And all of these events currently happen at noon Eastern on Mondays for data engineers lunches and Cassandra lunches on Thursdays at noon Eastern. But again, we are looking at having a more variable time slot so we could cater to the worldwide public live stream as well. And we have released our third runbook for Apache Cassandra. We'll drop the link to that in the Zoom chat. So you can fill out the form, get the runbook for free. And with that, we will go ahead and start the topic for today. So as mentioned before, can everyone see the new slide deck?
Yep.
Great. So as mentioned before, I don't have any preferences in terms of questions. So if you have any questions or comments, feel free to speak up. If you prefer at a good stopping point, we'll have a couple of those during the demo because we'll have to wait for some stuff to come up. So I'll prompt you if you have any questions, as well as feel free to drop questions in the chat, on the YouTube chat or the Zoom chat at any point. And I'll get to them when I can at a good stopping point. But again, feel free to speak up if you prefer to. So again, today's topic is going to be on Airflow and Presto. And we're going to focus primarily on how to connect Airflow and Presto. So taking a look out there, so Airflow has a native connector for Presto, but there's not a ton of good documentation. Like there's some documentation on the Airflow docs, as well as the connector docs themselves of how to potentially use it, but there's no good examples of how to truly use it. So hopefully this will be useful for people who are using Presto and want to wrap Airflow orchestration around it. So if you're not familiar with what Presto is, we have a couple talks on our YouTube channel related to Presto, as well as in the vein of open source BI tools, as well as open source technologies and open source tools that can do SQL on Cassandra specifically. And so you can find those videos on our YouTube channel. But if you're not familiar with Presto, it's an open source distributed SQL query engine for big data, right? It originally came out of Facebook, and you know, Facebook, they have tons of data. So they needed to find a solution for querying petabytes of data, right? And so if you just Google Presto, a couple of things might come up, right? So there are some things I want to mention is that Presto, when you are considering it in the open source aspect, it's Presto DB. You might see some references to something called Presto SQL. So that was actually some of the people who created Presto at Facebook had branched off and created a new company, and that one was called Presto SQL. So essentially it's a fork off the main, right? However, they are now called Trino. So if you do see documentation on there, you'll usually see Trino, formerly Presto SQL. But the one when we're focused on and for open source specifically, it's Presto DB. As well as there's an enterprise version that you'll see out there. So like for Airflow, you have Astronomer, right? So for Presto, you'll usually see Starburst, and you'll see Starburst has pretty good documentation as well in general regarding Presto. So the demo that we'll talk about in a second, there's a couple Docker containers we could use. I found one for open source, but you can use the Presto one or the Starburst Presto Docker container, but it's just extra stuff built into it that we didn't really need. So I ended up and just used the open source one, and we'll talk about that once we get there. But again, Presto, it's designed and written from the ground up for interactive analytics and approaches speeds of like commercial data warehousing for the scale of enterprises and organizations like Facebook, et cetera. And a single Presto, one of the main reasons it's useful is because it can combine data from multiple sources, right? And so when you're using a tool like Spark SQL or Presto to do SQL analytics and queries against big data, most often at enterprise levels, you're working with tons of data sources. So there's a comment in the YouTube chat that AWS Athena is a managed Presto. So if you're on the AWS ecosystem, you can take a look at AWS Athena as well. So one of the big things about the use cases of Presto, again, as mentioned, is you can query where data lies. So you don't have to pull in data, kind of how like Spark sometimes pulls data into memory before it actually acts on it. Presto can do that at the querying data where it lives. So like for our example today, we'll have one container with Cassandra, one container for Presto. But say if we had one container for Cassandra, one container for Postgres, we can use a single Presto instance to talk to both of those and make them as catalogs and be able to query on both of those at the same time. So some of the use cases in the real world is like Comcast. Comcast has Cassandra, SQL Server, MongoDB, Oracle, Teradata. So they have tons of different data sources that they can use Presto to do unified analytics across all of those. Some other use cases in the real world also mentioned on Presto DB is Airbnb and Dropbox. They also use Presto. So large companies with lots of data sources end up using a tool like Presto. So if you're not familiar with Presto, here's an example of the CLI. We'll actually be taking a look at this as well, but just to read this a little bit, you see Presto CLI is how you initialize it. So we'll be using it via the Docker container. So the command will look a little bit different, but there are some parameters you can add to the command. So if you specify which catalog you're using, here's where you can say if you have a Hive catalog, a Cassandra catalog, a Postgres or Mongo catalog, you can specify and go one level deeper. So it's typical query notation where you do schema.table or database, whichever SQL, NoSQL you're working with, and then the dot notation of how to dig deeper, right? And then in the schema level, you can correlate that to the table level. So catalog level would be key space level for Cassandra for us specifically. And so you can run SQL on top of that once you're there, and then you can get back data set formatted or tabular formatted data based on your SQL query. And then you also get back some metrics related to like the split times, query execution times, et cetera. And also to view this in another UI is also to look at the Presto UI itself, which we'll also take a look at in the demo. So here you can see running queries, workers. We'll be using very standard layout. We'll take a look at that at the demo portion. But you can see running queries, you can see finished queries, you can see failed queries, queued queries, etc. So it's a pretty good UI in terms of similar to like the Spark UI where you can see your applications and then your logs per applications. But here it's more specifically for the specific queries. And you can see where they came from as well, which is pretty interesting. And with that, we'll go ahead and move on to the demo portion. So if anyone has any questions, feel free to speak up or ask. Otherwise, we can talk about what we're going to be doing in the demo today. Okay, So in the demo, we're going to be spinning up Docker containers on Gitpod. So this entire demo you can do on your browser, right? You don't have to download anything to your computer. Everything can be done on Docker and on Gitpod. But again, if you want to do this demo, you can do it. You just need prerequisites of Docker on your computer. And then we're going to show you how to connect Presto and Airflow. And we're also going to take a look at, again, as mentioned, the Presto UI and CLI. And then we're also going to run an Airflow DAG that runs a Presto query. It's a very simple, again, today's talk is going to be specifically on just how to connect Airflow and Presto. I am planning on making a more in-depth ETL processing or data orchestration pipeline, bringing in truly Cassandra. So we're going to be using Cassandra today just to show you how to set up a connector and then make it sure you can see it. And then you can see the schemas within the Cassandra catalog, right? So today is just going to be focusing on, does it connect properly? Can we see stuff coming back from Presto? And then in the next talk, most likely at a future Cassandra launch, we'll actually bring up some more in-depth Cassandra queries and then use Presto to run SQL on top of Cassandra, run join queries, etc. So if you're looking forward to that, stick around, like and subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so that way you can get notified when we do have that talk. All right, so with that, I am going to open up Gitpod, and let me drop this link in the YouTube chat as well as the Zoom chat. There we go. And so what we're going to do here is we're just going to open a new tab, and we are going to, I'm going to remind myself later, and then I'm going to hit Gitpod. I already have a plugin on my GitHub, so that way it's a one click. But again, you can come here and press this hyperlink here to open it in Gitpod yourself. And the thing about Gitpod is you don't have to be on a computer. You could probably do this demo on an iPad, maybe even mobile, but I won't say mobile that far, but definitely on a tablet, you should be able to do this demo as well. So coming down here, we're just going to quickly run our setup script. There are ways to make this faster. I just wanted to have a working copy MVP1, and then I can iterate it on it later using Docker files and Gitpod structure, but we'll get back to that in a second. So what we're going to do here is I have my repo up here, so I'm just going to literally copy and paste from it, but we'll talk through it as we're going along, right? So what we're going to do here is run setup.sh. And so what's happening here is we are going to run a Presto container, and we'll talk about, again, this Presto specific open source container, as well as latest Cassandra. So I think it's either 3.11 or 4.0. And then we're going to install Airflow using pip install, and we're also going to install the Presto provider, so that's important. So when you're setting up a connection, if you don't have the provider, it won't be able to connect to it. And then we're just going to run web server, and we're going to run it on 7080 since the Presto UI is going to run on 8080. So again, in the future, I'm probably going to create a Docker Compose that just does all of this for us, and you can just do Docker Compose up. But again, for the purposes of just getting this working, it's in this current setup right now. But while you're going along with this demo, just make sure as these dialogues pop up to make stuff public so that the containers can talk to each other. Again, once they're in the same network and Docker Compose, it'll be a little bit easier. So coming to the provider's Presto, while that stuff's running in the background, is we have these hooks. And the main one we're going to be working with today is the let me see if I can make this a little bit bigger. I cannot. The main one we're going to be working with today is the Presto hook. So in terms of documentation goes, this is about all you'll get of how to use it, right? It doesn't show you how to truly use it in a DAG. It just shows you instantiate the Presto hook, you have a query, and then you say get records and you pass in the query. And that's about it. So we'll take a look at what the DAG itself looks like as well. But I just wanted to show you this because the documentation can be a little bit limited. So just so that people are aware. And then again, coming to why we used the specific Docker container we used. So on the Presto DB docs themselves, they say that they have like a Docker file here, but they also say you can use this. don't want to butcher this, but this Presto DB sandbox, which is the one we're specifically using. But as I mentioned previously, we can also use the Starburst version, which is again enterprise level Presto with some other bells and whistles, right? So I actually got this demo working using the Starburst. Obviously, the commands are a little bit different. I am familiar with Starburst, so that's why I started with it, because I couldn't verify if this one was good to use right away. So I said, okay, I'm familiar with this. Let me get this running. And then once I got it running, I switched back to this specific sandbox Docker instance. So if you do want to use the Starburst Enterprise Platform Docker image, you will need to change some of the commands that place the catalog files into the right places, since the PWDs are a little bit different. So that's just something to keep in mind if you do end up going that way, as well as how to run the Presto CLI. As well as but we'll get to that stuff later. But with the Docker container we're using here, which is the Presto DB sandbox one, it comes with the CLI executable already on the Docker container, so we can just run Presto CLI to start up the Presto CLI itself. But if you want to do it on your local, we could do like, you just download the executable, rename it, and then kmod exit per the documentation. We've already talked about this previously. I had a previous demo just straight up using local Presto, local Cassandra. So you can find out more on that as well. But so let's come back to here. So we're just going to do a Docker PS real quick, and we see our Cassandra containers up and our Presto DB sandbox container are up. So we also have some open ports here. So again, as mentioned, 8080 is Presto UI, 9042 Cassandra. I think this one is the scheduler. We didn't really have to make this one public, but I just did it just in case. 7080 is the Airflow UI, right? So coming back to the README, so what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and open up the 8080. I'm just going to close out of these since we don't need these right now. So this is the Presto UI, right, as mentioned. So I'm just going to click on the failed and finished as well. So right now we don't have any queries because we haven't run anything, right? So what we're going to do here is we are going to, oh, sorry, let me come back here. We are going to open up 7080, which is our Airflow UI. And we're going to just sign in with admin password, and our Airflow UI is up. And we don't see the scheduler error. Again, this is just a straight vanilla Airflow install. So we have SQLite as our backend, and we have a sequential executor in our Airflow config file. But again, this is just basic how to get everything connected. So what we're going to do here is now I'm going to skip some steps just because the scheduler takes some time. It's defaulted to 5 minutes for every interval, right, to pick up new DAGs. So I'm going to run the DAG stuff ahead of time. So that way, by the time we get to it, the DAG should be imported already. So what we're going to do here is we are going to run 6.1, which will take our DAG file here, and then we'll actually, let's take a look at the DAG before we move it. But essentially what we're doing here is we're importing some stuff. So we're importing variable, and then the important one is the Presto hook, right? And then Python operator so that we can run the Python callable. So we have some just basic definitions here. So the main chunk of what we want in order to connect Airflow and Presto is this, again, in the documentation, py Presto hook, instantiate the hook, and then we're going to create a query. So the way I've set it up is that I just used a variable, and then we're going to create a variable in Airflow UI, and we can just change the query in Airflow UI just to make it a little bit easier, so we don't have to make any like hard-coded changes. So you can play around with it with just editing the variable key value, and then we're going to say get the records using the query, and then just return the data, and we'll look at it and we'll see the XCOMs that get returned as well as the logs. And then again, we're going to run this task via Python operator, and we're just going to say run this method, right? And then again, this is very simple. This obviously will have some downstream tasks when we expand on this for the future Cassandra launch, but for right now, just let it talk to Presto using Airflow. Specifically talk to Cassandra too, but we'll get to there. Okay, so let's go ahead and run. Again, we're jumping steps here, but since for the sake of time, we're just going to run this command, which is going to make our DAGs directory in the Airflow directory. And then we're going to move the Presto Python file DAG, quote unquote, and into that directory. So what we're going to do now is scroll back up on the README, and we're now going to set up the connection for Airflow and Presto. Sorry, I have a ton of things. I'm trying to move them out of the way. Okay, cool. So one thing to note is we are just going to get our IP address for the Docker containers. We're just going to copy that. And so we're going to come back into the Airflow UI. We are going to go to admin, connections. And again, the connections can be created and set via the CLI or the Airflow CLI, but we're just going to do everything in the UI, simpler to use, easier to follow along. So we're just going to look for Presto, and we are going to edit the record. And you see here connection type, Presto. So this comes from the package we installed for the Presto provider. If you did not install the Presto provider, it would not default to this. And it would probably just default to something called like email or something. But some things here is we want to take that host name we got back from the command we ran, hostname Accompanying, and then schema here, again, as mentioned, we're going to leave this as blank because we just want to see top level. Login, it didn't specifically prompt us for a login when we logged into Presto UI, but you can just use admin. And then again, port here is going to be 8080. And we are going to test the connection, and the connection tested successfully. So if you have some host names incorrect, or if you don't include login, you will see an error. So something just to keep in mind. So now that our Presto connection is set, we can now update our Cassandra properties file. So the way that Presto works is, if you're not familiar with it, let me docker exec it presto bash. So in Presto, there is a etc directory. So in this etc directory is where you have definitions to what the config looks like, what your JVM config, JVM or node properties as well. So this is where you define like where your UI lives, what kind of worker and structure you want, as well as how many workers you want. So if you want to take a look at this, it's pretty well defined in the Presto DB documentation itself. The main thing we want to look at here is the catalog. So if we go one level deeper into the catalog, we see JMX properties, memory properties. So these are preloaded from the Docker container. So if we just cat tpch properties, we see that it has a connector name, and that's about it, right? So the one that we want to add to the catalog directory is this Cassandra properties file. So here we have the connector name, which is Cassandra, and then we have to provide it contact points. So for us, we're just going to run a quick sed command, which is going to essentially, this will paste for me, which will take the host name and then replace the configuration we have here. And so we see that now, right? So we use sed flag I to do in place overwrite. And so now what we're going to do is we're going to copy this onto the Docker container itself. And we're just going to grab the Docker container. We're grepping it to get the specific ID and then passing it to, again, etc. catalog and then Cassandra.properties. So now if we go back into Presto bash, cd etc catalog, and we see our Cassandra properties file. So let's go ahead and exit from here. And so next thing what we're going to do is we are going to run the Presto CLI. And so here, if we just run a basic command like show catalogs, we see the default ones, but we don't see our Cassandra one, right? So one thing to note is when you add a new catalog, sometimes you may need to restart the server. So something quickly you can do is just run docker restart Presto, right? So while that's happening in the background, if we take a look at the Presto UI real quick while we have it up, we can see that we say show catalogs, and we can see where stuff is coming from, as well as some metrics related to time, duration, etc. Right? So while Presto is restarting in the background, what we're going to do is check our Airflow UI. Let's see if our DAG is now here. Yep, 33. So let's go to Presto DAG. So again, as mentioned, what we're doing here is we're grabbing a variable called Presto query. So that's something we will need to create. Is if we go into admin and we go to variables and we hit plus. So we're going to call this Presto query. So there is a question in the chat. Why do you decide not to change the contact points manually? Is there a side effect if you decided to change the contact point manually? It's just to make it easier for people to follow along. It's just doing a set replace. If you have, again, this is a very simple demo, so you might have more contact points. And again, one thing I do want to mention here is in the specific catalog file, we're only referencing one cluster, right? Single node, right? But we're only referencing one host name, right? So you can have multiple Cassandra clusters, but they would just need their own catalog file or quote unquote properties file. So it'd be Cassandra_1 properties, Cassandra_2 properties, and those can point to different clusters. So that way you can run queries using both of those via Presto, if that helps answer your question. But the main reason of why we just did it using a set replace is just to make it easier so people don't have to do it manually. Okay, so coming back to value here, let me just take a quick peek to the YouTube chat, see if there's any questions. Nope. Again, feel free to drop questions or comments or speak up if you have anything as well. So coming back to creating the variable here, we are going to just use a basic, again, we're going to run this show catalogs, and don't forget the semicolon. And so this is going to be our query, our first query, right? So what we're going to do here is come back to our terminal, and we are going to rerun the Presto CLI, and we are rerunning show catalogs, and we should now see Cassandra again, or we should now see Cassandra, and we do. Right. So another query that we can run is like show schemas in Cassandra. Right. And so here's where it returns the cases we have Cassandra. Right. So we have show schemas in Cassandra, and we get back the default Cassandra schemas that we have. So if we do like select all from system schema, or sorry, we need to do dot notation. So it'd be Cassandra system schema dot tables, I believe. Yeah, so here we just ran an SQL query on top of Cassandra using Presto, and we returned the tables, or we selected all, but we selected all specifically from the system schema dot tables key space table, right? From the Cassandra catalog, which again is defined by the host name we set inside of it. So what we're going to do here, sorry, what we're going to do here is, can I exit out? Well, let me exit out. It's acting up. Okay, there we go. Okay. So again, if we come back here, we give this a refresh, we should now see our finished queries that we ran. Again, select all from Cassandra system schema tables, and we see some metrics: wall time, completed splits, total query wall time, CPU time spent. Also some other things: peak memory, reserved memory, user memory, queued splits, writing splits, etc. But again, we're not running heavy loads, right? And you can click on individual queries, similar to like the Spark UI. We can click on applications as well, and you can see sessions, executions, timeline, resource utilization. So some of this stuff can be very helpful for doing the analytics on Presto itself. And you can also see live plans, see how the jobs are breaking down, which is pretty interesting. So you can see the stages, similar to how Airflow, you can see the tasks and how they break down, or sorry, Airflow, but then also Spark UI, how you can see the task breakdown. But again, you can see table scan and then output, stage performance, splits, and then also JSON here, where you can see JSON definition as well. So let's now come to the DAG itself. So we are now ready to run the DAG itself. So again, remember the first query that we're running is just show catalogs. So we should get back what we were looking for, which is just Cassandra plus the other defaults that were already there. So let's go ahead and unpause this DAG and let's go to the graph view, and it's already completed. So if we look at the log here, we can see that it uses the Presto default connection that we set because we're saying use the we instantiate using the Presto hook, right? And it's returned our catalogs, right? Cassandra JMX query. So if we go back here, look at our terminal, which I've closed. So let's just reopen this, show catalogs. Let me get back 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And then if we look here, we get back 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And again, all of this data can be stored as XCOM, and we can use this to transfer it to and from tasks. So this future state, again, we'll get to that eventually in a future Cassandra lunch. But again, the main focus of today is to show you how to do this. Just straight up connect Airflow and Cassandra. How can you wrap your Presto queries or Presto or data analytics or ETL processes that you have in Airflow? And so coming now back to variables, let's switch up the variables, right? So if we want to come here and we edit this and we say, instead of show catalogs, we want to do show schemas in Cassandra, right? So again, just running the same queries we did. And then if we go back to the DAG, let's go to our active DAG and let's re-trigger it. And let's go back to the graph. Okay, it's completed. So if we go back into the log, we'll get different results back, which is, again, information schema, system auth, et cetera, right? So we're able to run Presto queries on Cassandra from Airflow. And so if we now want to go one level deeper and again, replicate that select all statement, what we can do is go into variables and just edit the variable again. And so this would be select all from Cassandra.systemschema.tables. We'll save it. And then we'll go back to our DAG. And we will go ahead and hit run again. All right, so it looks like it's completed. Let's take a look at the log. And we see this kind of data, right? So we see system traces, events, keys, more data like this, but it'll be cleaner to look in the XCOM format. But let's take a look real quick. So we can see here it's returned back our data as an array with object and keys. So again, we can then use this to further expand on what our data orchestration will look like, or data ops in general. But again, yeah, that wraps up the demo portion. Before I move on, I'm opening it up to any questions. Feel free to speak up from the YouTube. Feel free to drop comments or questions in the chat, as well as Zoom. Feel free to speak up or drop a question in the chat.
Yeah. So is it possible to control what you get back in the XCOMs, going down to specific fields and such? Because XCOMs are meant to pass data between tasks in Airflow. So if you could cut it down to the data that you needed without extra processing in the next task.
Yeah, so I'm pretty sure you should be able to do that via just the Python code itself in the code. So say, let's say, let's go to the DAG code. And this is something I'm investigating for the future Cassandra lunch, right? Of how to run the queries, get back only what we want, pass it along to another state. So I'm thinking of hooking up Presto and Spark, and then we'll see, because Presto itself is not necessarily like as powerful in the sense of ETL as Spark is, but that's a future discussion. But again, here I think is where you can do that. So we're just saying return everything, right? So if we have some transformation within the DAG itself here, we could probably cut it down. Or if we have another set in here where we just say Presto task, and then we have a new task that then grabs the XCOM and then makes some transformations and then puts it into the next stage. That could also be a potential option to do that, right? Because XComs just transfer to and from, and you can grab from them via Airflow.
Yeah, sounds great.
Cool. Any other questions or comments? Feel free to speak up. Okay, doesn't look like there's any new questions. So what we're going to do here is I have one last thing I just want to talk about. Is while I was doing some more research on Presto and rereading their new documentation, I came across this thing where there's a blog post, but there's also some design docs on this essentially setup where it's Presto on Spark, which runs Presto code as a library within Spark Executor. I thought that was pretty interesting. There's a couple blogs, one by Presto itself on their main blog here, as well as a video of it on Databricks. But just looking through the blog here, it kind of gives you some use cases as well as some example architecture. So you can see where Presto, the coordinator and worker nodes fall into the architecture as well as the Spark architecture. And then again, it talks about why Presto alone is not a good enough fit for like batch workloads, as mentioned. So one thing that people are looking into is kind of unifying Presto, SQL, and then Spark for ETL aspects. But again, Spark has an SQL layer. So pending your use case and what you're working with, it may depend what you use. But I just thought it was interesting. Wanted to bring it up. I can drop the link to this in the YouTube chat if you guys are interested. But again, this slide deck will be available immediately after this talk, and it'll be linked in our YouTube description, so you can find it there. But they have a talk on it. They have a use case into it. I also looked at Superglue, which is pretty interesting. I was thinking about maybe doing a data engineers launch on this, but maybe that's something I'd do in the future. But I thought it was a pretty interesting tool for managing your data lineage and like data observability. So it's similar from just what I'm reading, just quick glance. It looks like it's like a data catalog mixed with like a graph database, which is pretty interesting. If someone has any experience with Superglue, feel free to speak up. I don't personally, but I'd be interested in taking a deeper look at it, potentially giving a demo on it for data engineers lunch. Definitely, I'm going to put it in our backlog. But again, this blog specifically talks about like when to use the Presto on Spark. So again, they mentioned Presto on Spark benefits pipelines written in Presto, but that operate on terabyte, petabyte levels of data. But then they take advantage of Spark's processing capabilities. So the biggest win here is you can scale to large data volumes, use scale Presto's resource management, as well as the reliability and elasticity of Presto as a compute engine. And then again, why it matters, you can disaggregate shuffles, you can isolate executors, and you can essentially just maximize on resource management, scheduling, etc. So again, take a look at this, see if you're interested. I'd love some thoughts, if anyone has any, on Presto on Spark. Maybe that can be a talk we give on Data Engineers Launch. So let us know, comment below if you're interested on a talk on Presto and Spark, Presto on Spark specifically in this context. Yeah. With that, we will go ahead and wrap up for today. If anyone has any questions, feel free to drop them as comments. We'll get to them when we can. As well as don't forget to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. All these videos are available on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/AnantCorp. And don't forget to turn on the notification bell, so that way when we do go live or when we upload a video, you can get notified and you can see it in your subscription stream. And with that, we will wrap it up for today. Thank you, everyone. Take care.